What's up guys, Perry from Rockville here, and today I'm going to show you how to set up your Vol70 200 wall volume controller. So as you can see, it comes with the controller itself. It also comes with the front plate here to attach when everything is mounted to the wall, and it also comes with the hardware to mount your controller and plate to your wall. So before we dive in, let's quickly explain how 70 volt systems work. 70 volt amps allow you to run a large amount of speakers at a fixed and constant wattage off that one amp. So you could run 100 speakers off one amplifier if you match the watts being drawn by your speakers to the ability of the amp. So for example, if my amplifier has 100 watts, I can tap each of my speakers at 10 watts, giving me the ability to use 10 speakers. Now, if you had a multi-zone 70 volt amplifier, this opens up the flexibility to where you can control your audio and how you can have it set up in your space. But the same principles apply. You have to match the wattage amount of your speakers to the zone's recommended wattage amount and you'll be good to go. And with the multi-zone amplifier, you'll have independent volume control of the different speakers in the different rooms. If you want to learn more about 70 volt technology, check out a video that we made on that. Now before we go into installation, we first have to decide which amplifier we want to use with our wall controller. At Rockville, we have both single zone and multi-zone amplifiers that can be used with our volume controller. For the most part, the installation to the amp or to the zone of the amp is identical. The only difference in the installation is where you plug in the speaker wire to your amp. With the multi-zone amplifier, you would connect the speaker wire to the output of whichever zone you want to use. And for the single zone amplifier, you'll want to make sure to plug into the 70 volt main output instead of the 100 volt or the 8 ohm main output. Another thing you want to make sure of is that the wattage or power of your volume controller matches the wattage of your amplifier or the zone you're using on your amplifier. In this case, I'm using the RCS 650-6 amplifier that can handle 200 watts or less. So with this, I want to make sure that the total amount of watts I have all of my speakers tapped to is 200 watts or less. Now, if I was using the volume controller in a multi-room setup with the RCS 650-6, which can distribute 200 watts per zone, I just want to be careful not to exceed 650 watts with all of my speakers combined in this setup, and I also want to be sure not to exceed 200 watts per zone. So now that we figured out what amplifier we're using for our setup, we now want to figure out where the volume controller is going on our wall. We recommend picking a spot that's the same height as the light switches in your room. Now you want to figure out if you want to have the controller inside your wall, which is the more common setup, or if you want to have the controller outside of your wall. Running outside of the wall is a little less common, but there are some industrial applications that call for running electric or speakers outside of the wall. For the outside setup, you would want to use an electrical box that looks like this. For today, we're going to set our controller inside of the wall, but the same principles will apply as far as the wiring goes for both setups. Next, we'll want to make the hole in our wall for the controller, but first let's figure out how we're going to make the hole. First, you want to make sure that there's nothing behind the wall that can get damaged while we're making the hole, like a stud, for example. You can use a stud finder to make sure that there's no obstacles behind your wall. Now, when you're installing your volume controller, you want to make sure to pair it with the right electrical box. So we have a few different options to do this. So for example, we have the single gain drywall ring here, which is the most common for these types of setups. You can also get a single gain electrical box that looks like this, but we recommend cutting off the back like this so that there's proper ventilation for your controller. To keep things simple, we're going to use the single gain drywall ring, which again is the most common electrical box to use when setting up a wall volume controller. And from here, we're actually going to use this box as a cutting template to make the hole in our wall. So we already went ahead and made the hole in our wall already, but we recommend using a handsaw or a sawzall to make the cutout at home. So after you've made the hole, you're gonna place the box right inside of the hole. Then you can take a Phillips head screwdriver and tighten these screws on the top and the bottom. Then you're gonna start to feel some tension as these clamps here are gonna attach to the hole in your wall. So the next step is running the speaker wires to and from the location we picked. So with this, we need 2 sets of speaker wire, with 1 set running from the amplifier through our wall, out the hole here to connect to our volume controller, and the second set of speaker wire running from our controller through our wall to the first speaker in our chain. We also recommend labeling each set to keep in mind which set is running to the amplifier and which set is running to the speakers. Now, while we're running the speaker wire through our ceiling and through our walls, we do want to take account of what is behind the ceiling and walls while we're running the wire through. Again, you can use a stud finder to make sure there's no obstacles behind your wall and to plan your wiring and make sure how much wire you need. A general rule of thumb is that you want to use between 20 and 40% extra wire in case there's any obstacles in the way. So if the distance between the terminals of your amp and the terminals of your controller are 10 feet, we recommend using about 12 to 14 feet of speaker wire. And if you have additional slack, you can always wrap it around in a service loop. We also recommend you use CL2 rated speaker wire. The CL2 rating means that these cables have passed the National Electrical Code test for a high rating of fire resistance. So these cables won't burn during a sudden surge of electricity up to 150 watts, and the cable itself will not carry a flame, which is why we recommend using it in your home, office, or commercial space. So once we got the speaker wire running from the amp to the hole in our wall and to our speakers, we can now connect the sets of speaker wire into our volume controller. So if we take a look at the controller, you'll see this Euroblock terminal, which comes out very easily like this. And this way it makes it way easier to connect the speaker wires into these terminals here. Now you'll see we have an input and an output terminal. So the speaker wire that's coming from the amplifier is going to go into the input terminal, and the speaker wire that's coming from the speakers is going to go to the output terminal. So on this side of the Euroblock terminal, we have the flathead screws, which we can use to open up or tighten the terminals. So to loosen them up to place our speaker wire in, we can take our flathead and just turn them to the left like so. Once we have them loose, we're gonna place our speaker wire into the input and output. Again, the speaker wire that's coming from the amplifier is going into the input, and the speaker wire that's coming from our speakers is going into the output. Then we're gonna take our flathead screwdriver and tighten these terminals back up to secure the wire to the Euroblock terminal. As you can see, we did this already with our Euroblock terminal here and our speaker wire, so we can go ahead now and plug them into our controller like this. Now that we've got our wiring all set up to our controller here, we can go ahead and fasten our controller into the wall like so. Next, we gotta secure the controller to the electrical box. So to do that, we're gonna take our long screws here. We're gonna take one and feed it through the bottom holes like this, and then do the same thing for the top holes here. Then from here, you can take either a screwdriver or a power drill to secure the volume controller into the box. But if you're using a power drill, you'll just want to go nice and easy so that you don't damage the screws, the volume controller, or the box. Now we can add the finishing touches by taking the faceplate here and lining it up to the controller like so. And then we're gonna take these faceplate screws here and line them up to the holes on the top and bottom. And then we're gonna take a flathead screwdriver to secure these screws onto the plate. So when it comes to setting the volume for your controller, we actually recommend that you start by setting it to 0 like this. And then you're gonna go to the volume on your amplifier and set it to about 75 or 80%, so that this way we can set the volume as high as we want on our controller and still have plenty of headroom. Now to set up another volume controller for another room or another zone of speakers, you're gonna follow the same exact steps, but remember not to exceed 650 watts with all of the speakers in your setup or exceed 200 watts per zone. And for setting the volume per zone, you're gonna raise it up to 75 or 80%, again to make sure that you can raise the volume as high as you want on your controller and still have plenty of headroom on your zone. So once we're all set, we can go ahead and use the volume controller in our setup. So I have it all the way down right now. Gonna press play on my music, start to bring in the volume with our controller here. Sure enough, we start to hear something. Cool. We can even go up on volume here. Yeah. That's great. So we can control it all with the controller here. Sets the volume, sets the mood. So cool. Let's go up one more. Oh yeah. Very cool. So hopefully this showed you guys how easy it is to set up your VAL 7200. But of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to our customer support team through phone or email. As always, I'm Perry from Rockville, and we'll see you guys next time.